Turks, Cenk Uygur, John Irola with you guys. I am sick. When we were done with the State of the Union last night, I was trembling in the car. But then here's
from rage.
No, from being sick. But then I passed out immediately, and I didn't think I was coming in today, so I didn't set the alarm. I got 10.5 hours of sleep.
How'd that feel?
Oh, felt amazing.
That's getting to too long. That's like I wake up and it's too much.
Wrong. No such thing as too much when it comes to sleep.
Yeah.
When I was a kid, I used to sleep 12 hours all the time. Oh, it was so great.
Yeah.
Oh, it was like the best times of my life. I'd sleep in the basement when I was in like senior in high school, and there's no sunlight down there, like in the summertime.
You just never wake up.
Oh, you never wake up.
Yeah.
You wake up at 2 in the afternoon. Oh, it's like the greatest thing that ever happened.
But yeah, considering how sick you were yesterday, I want to make sure that you get credit for sucking it up, coming into work, and making sure that you get me sick before my birthday trip to Vegas. So thank you.
Okay, no problem. Can do.
Appreciate that.
All right, we got a hell of a show for you guys today, of course, as we do every day. People are being rounded up. We're going to tell you about that. Floods are not being rounded up. We're going to tell you about that. And Trump doing favors for his donors. No, heaven forfend.
Weird.
Okay, so let's get started.
Okay, let's do it. Today we have yet another Republican committee chairman who is choosing not to run for re-election this fall. This one is a name that you might have heard before. It's Trey Gowdy, who is probably best known for his chairmanship of the House Benghazi Committee and also his new boy band hairstyle. And so he is out, and he put out a statement. We're not going to read the whole thing because it's just terrible. But we're going to read part of it. He said, "I will not be filing for re-election of Congress nor seeking any other political or elected office. Instead, I will be returning to the justice system. Whatever skills I may have are better utilized in a courtroom than in Congress, and I enjoy our justice system more than our political system. As I look back on my career, it is the jobs that both seek and reward fairness that are most rewarding. Yeah. There is a time to come and a time to go. This is the right time for me to leave politics and return to the justice system."
Okay, so there's a number of issues here. Some are similar to other Republicans who have retired, and some are distinct for Trey Gowdy.
Yes.
So one thing that is different, he's now, I think, the 36th person. They have different counts. I don't know why. But one article says 34, and another one says 36. Republican to say they're not coming back for another term, retiring, resigning, some in disgrace, some because they're going to lose their elections, most because they're going to lose their elections. That's where Gowdy is different than the rest. He's in a district that's plus 25 for Trump. He was unlikely to lose an election even in a massive swing year.
Yeah.
So that most of the 36 are going because of that.
Yeah.
Now, one thing that he does share with some other folks that have left, mainly Chaffetz, is he was charged with overseeing the Trump administration because he's the head of the Oversight Committee. That's not an enviable position. That puts you in a tight spot because now, for reasons that we're probably not even aware of yet. Now, remember, they have intelligence that we do not, right? Yeah. They have information we do not. So he's either going to piss off his base and say, "I'm going to do my job here and hold Trump accountable," or I'm going to have to sell my soul. Yeah. And he doesn't have much left after the Benghazi investigation and the IRS investigation. Now, there's one other thing that's really critical in the case of Gowdy. On Tuesday, a seat on the 4th Circuit Court of Appeals opened up in South Carolina. That covers South Carolina. And he obviously, based on the statement that John read to you right there, obviously wants that to go back into the judiciary where he had served before, into the justice system, as he called it. And that seat opening up and him wanting to resign immediately thereafter is not a coincidence.
Yeah.
So that seems like a nice safe harbor for him. Get the hell out of Dodge. This thing's not going to end well. And then there's a nice soft seat for me there on a prestigious court. And then maybe he dreams that could open him up to Supreme Court one day, maybe, if he's got the right Republican president. But for the moment being, the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals is a great position. If he can land it, and with the Republicans in charge, he probably can.
And if not, he's a well-known and probably well-connected Republican. If he wanted to go into lobbying, he could do that. He didn't mention it here, but of course he's not going to, but he could do it anyway. And I'm glad that you pointed out the context of his district. As you said, 25 points towards Trump, which means that he would be safe for re-election unless we were in a context where challengers were regularly doing better than plus 25 over the previous, which is actually where we are. That doesn't mean that it would have happened in this one, but there have been people getting 36-point swings over the previous fall. A little bit more background information for him leaving. This is from Politico, saying that Gowdy rarely participated in House GOP events, rarely attending the weekly GOP conference, for example. He often talked privately about resenting the increasingly partisan atmosphere, of which he had no part as head of the Benghazi committee. And he loved to say that he wished he was home watching cheesy Hallmark movies with his wife. Isn't that sweet?
So there are parts of that I believe, and parts I do not. So look, he was asked to chair those committees partly because, for whatever reason in Washington, he had credibility at that point. But in reality, to me, what was maybe even more egregious than the Benghazi hearings were the IRS hearings. The IRS hearings where we found out that no, liberal groups had been investigated just as much as conservative groups had, and that so-called controversy was purely made up, and it was made up to try to discredit the IRS so they couldn't collect taxes from rich people. And now the person who's most likely to be the head of the IRS, according to our own reporting at TYT Investigates, is a guy whose main job was to make sure that rich people can avoid taxes. Yet another person who is going to be assigned to a part of the government to help destroy that part of the government. That was the whole point of the IRS investigation. So when Gowdy says, oh golly, gee, I don't like partisan politics, and he went to go help his rich Republican donors with that investigation, color me a little skeptical. Now, on the other hand, the Republicans did push him to do Benghazi, and when he didn't say Hillary Clinton should be locked up, the previous friends like Jim Jordan and others were furious at him. They're like, it was a nice hatchet job, but not good enough. We wanted you to finish her and demand that she be sent to a federal penitentiary. So now remember, all the Benghazi hearings, because that was the reality, concluded that there was no laws broken at all.
Now, just for the larger context that this is a part of, this, as we said, is not just another Republican congressman choosing not to run again. It's a committee chairman, and what's interesting about this is, for a lot of people in the House, like, you spend years working your way up so that you can eventually be in a position where if your party takes control, you can become a chairperson, because that's where a lot of the power in the House actually lies. I mean, the House is a lot more, it's not quite the same as the Senate, where individual members don't have as much autonomous power, but if you're a chairman, you do have some power. So for so many of them to choose to leave implies that they don't think that that power is likely to be a lasting thing. And we want to go over some of the different chairmen who are leaving, because I believe right now it's at 8, which is
9 now.
9 now, but that's a huge number. So you have the House Financial Services Committee, the House Science, Space, and Technology Committee, which I'm sure probably doesn't have much on its plate these days since it doesn't believe in any of those things. The House Judiciary Committee, House Transportation and Infrastructure Committee, House Administration Committee, House Foreign Affairs Committee, House Appropriations Committee, which is obviously a huge thing for the House, and House Oversight and Government Reform Committee, which again doesn't have much on its plate. But that is a lot of chairmen all in one cycle choosing not to go, and we're not done yet. We still got a couple more months of the primaries left where many of them could feel comfortable to resign in the next few weeks or months.
In fact, both of those are records. Record number of incumbents from one party resigning, and record number of committee chairmen leaving at once. It was a record already a couple of chairmen ago, and 2 chairmen decided to step down just this week. Frelinghausen earlier this week, and now Gowdy. And as you look at that list, if you follow politics closely, those are some of the Republican so-called all-stars. Giant names on that list going, I got to get the hell out of Dodge. Now, look, in Gowdy's case, one more thing that's relevant. So he wasn't likely to lose a seat, but he was likely to lose the committee chairmanship, because the Democrats are now favored to win back the House in 2018, in which case the Republicans go into the minority, and then those chair positions are no longer the leads of those committees, and that's also relevant.
Yeah.
But mainly, I think the two most important things here, and what's your real takeaways are, he wants that seat in the judiciary. It was a good time to go, and he's seen information. This is my theory. He's seen information on Trump, and he does not want to be in a position where he's going to have to stake his political career on overseeing Donald Trump.
Yeah. Well, why don't we turn to someone who is staking their political career on overseeing and in this case helping out Donald Trump. Donald Trump is apparently now considering whether he will release the big memo implicating the FBI in some sort of gigantic conspiracy to take down Donald Trump, including the possibility of some sort of secret society. And so this is the Devin Nunes memo. And as of last night at the State of the Union, we have a little bit of video for you that implies that he is actually planning to release it. So let's watch that.
Let's release the memo. Oh, yeah. Oh, don't worry. 100%. Can you imagine that? Yes, sir. Last year, he'd be too angry. How you doing?
So he was speaking there with some giant that had wandered into the room. That was the largest person I've ever seen in my life. But anyway, it was a little bit hard to hear the audio, but he said whether, the guy asked him, are you going to release it? And he said 100%, which, I mean, he's not great at math, but that's all the percent. I mean, he's gonna do it. But then it turns out maybe not so much, because according to Sarah Huckabee Sanders, Trump still hasn't seen the memo. And when asked on CNN if there's a chance he wouldn't release the memo, Sanders said there's always a chance. Well, there's always a chance unless there's a 100% chance he's gonna do it. So there's a bit of a miscommunication there between them. But yeah, so this is a guy who's talking constantly about how important and damning this memo is. Has he read it?
No.
That's reading, he doesn't wanna read.
No, John, see, that's where I think there's a twist there. So first of all, the guy he's talking to is Jeff Duncan, who wandered in from the other side of the wall.
Exactly.
I think Jon Snow let him in. No, obviously he's up on the seats there in the State of the Union, but
I choose to think he's a giant.
Yeah, I like that I had to clarify that he is not in fact a giant from the other side of the wall. So anyway,
Hagrid asked him.
Yeah. Anyway. So when Sarah Huckabee Sanders was asked by Chris Cuomo on CNN, has the president seen the memo yet? Her answer was telling. She said, "Not that I'm aware of." Now that's a classic non-denial denial. Okay. That's not a no, that's a cover my ass. Well, I don't know it. I made sure that I don't know that he saw it. Now, why is that relevant? Because there are now reports that Nunes worked with Trump on the memo. Uh-oh, here we go.
There are now reports that Cenk Uygur will die on stage. Yes, actually a little bit later on, there was some breaking news in this area. Once we get done with this story, we can get into that. But yeah, there's a lot of discussion going on about to what extent Nunes, not just early on in the investigation when there was some questionable trips to the White House, but continues to coordinate with the White House on this. On something that is not just acting as a distraction from the actual investigation, but was clearly designed to be a distraction.
Yeah, so if in fact Trump has, or people in the Trump White House have worked with Nunes or his staffers on crafting the memo, then of course he's gonna release it. That's why he said 100% to Duncan. And he said, can you imagine that? Like, can you imagine me not releasing it? Now, why might they not release it? Well, all the intelligence agencies that work under Trump in the executive branch have come to Trump and said, don't release the memo. That's it. It is misleading. It is inaccurate. Don't do it. It's a really bad idea. But if Trump helped to write the memo, of course he's going to release the memo. That's why he says it's 100%. The whole point is not to be accurate. It's to do a hatchet job on the FBI. So when the FBI comes and says, please don't do it, he's like, right.
I actually have their statement. I can read a bit of that if you want. This was put out earlier today from the FBI saying, with regard to the House Intelligence Committee's memorandum, the FBI was provided a limited opportunity to review this memo the day before the committee voted to release it. As expressed during our initial review, we have grave concerns about material omissions of fact that fundamentally impact the memo's accuracy. So I think when you hear that the FBI doesn't want it to be released, My initial guess would be that there's some sort of classified information that they're worried about getting out, which generally is not something that I'm overly concerned about. I think that we have need of a lot of information. But here they're saying, no, it is purposefully misleading, and of course it's going to be. This entire thing has been so ridiculous, this whole release the memo thing, which is of interest largely to Sean Hannity and some bot networks online. It is an op-ed written by Devin Nunes, who is clearly attempting to protect Donald Trump, that is designed to do that. And so what's going to be in the memo? It's going to be like selected information that makes the FBI look bad. Well, what's new about that? Sean Hannity and any number of Republican congressmen have spent the past 6 months on a daily basis smearing the FBI. There's nothing new about that. And it's going to end up being a lot like the information of the testimony that comes out of Fusion GPS, where they kept saying they wanted it to be released, but then not allowing it to be released because the implication is far more damaging than the actual information in the testimony, or in this case, the memo.
The material omissions of fact that the FBI referred to is not the bug in the memo, it's the feature. The whole point is to smear the FBI, and that's why the Trump administration and Nunes, who worked in the transition team for Trump, are in favor of putting it out because the FBI is doing the investigation of Donald Trump. So they want to cover up for him. So look, this is much ado about nothing. I actually have now gotten to a point where, like as usual, we're stuck in this conundrum of this is a total non-issue, but the right wing yells so loudly about it that we feel compelled to counter it. But on the other hand, we're covering a non-issue.
Yeah.
It's a memo written by a highly partisan guy who was part of the Trump team telling us that Trump is right. Who cares? Who cares about that?
Yeah.
But that's the problem with the state of this country. The right wing is so loud that they changed the national conversation on so many issues that if we had a rational discourse, they'd be like, oh, okay, the Republicans think Trump is right. That's like your opinion, man. Democrats think he's wrong. That's your opinion, man. Now, what's the reality? But we're outside of the reality zone here.
Yeah, I have a couple of other pieces of information sort of around this that might not be non-issues, but we'll see. I'll run them past you. A lot of this information breaking in just the hour or two before we went live. But Devin Nunes today says that because from his point of view at least, the FBI is currently under investigation by his committee. Because they're under investigation, no one from the FBI can be used to brief the committee on any information about dossiers or any other information. So it's sort of a get out of jail free card on the FBI providing information, where he's just saying all of you are suspects so you can't be used anymore. I don't see that playing out the way he plans necessarily, but that is his goal, at least today, is to stonewall the FBI from being involved in any of these investigations. We also found out earlier today, I believe this was a CNN breaking news story, that back in December, Donald Trump had a conversation with Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein where he asked him if he was, quote, on my team, which is not the same thing as asking for a loyalty pledge, which he famously did with James Comey, but it's in that neighborhood. Now, Rod Rosenstein had said in his testimony to Congress that he had not been asked to take part in any sort of loyalty pledge or anything like that, so it appears that he didn't perceive it that way either. But that is from a guy like Donald Trump, who we know is very interested in loyalty. I think that that's not nothing.
Well, so a couple of important things there. On Rod Rosenstein's testimony, he pointedly refused to answer questions about whether he'd been asked about loyalty, but then went on to say, well, I didn't give a loyalty pledge. So that would make this story now fit into that, to his testimony, which is already on the record. So it turns out Donald Trump said, are you on my team? Again, asking for loyalty. And Rosenstein, in his interpretation, did not give that pledge. And so, and by the way,
he did say that he was on his team, or he's on the team, I think he said.
No, the report said that it was an awkward situation, which it most certainly is, because he's part of the executive branch run by Donald Trump. And he said, well, Mr. President, we're all part of the same team, right? And I mean, to give the guy credit, what can you say in a situation like that? No, piss off? No, you can't say that.
No, I am your enemy.
Right, and you also can't say, yes, I promise to be on your team and not the American government's team, et cetera. So Trump puts him in an untenable spot, as he did with Comey and so many others. And Trump, to this late date, either doesn't understand that you can't ask people in the Justice Department whether they are on your team, especially when they're charged with investigating you, or understands that and thinks, no, I am fundamentally corrupt. I don't care. I demand corruption from people. And both are possible given his lack of intelligence and his deep nature as a corrupt person that has been around forever and ever. If you go back to all of his business dealings in Trump University, et cetera. So now on Nunes, one last thing. Mike Quigley, who's a Democrat from Illinois, said that in a private meeting of congressmen, he asked Nunes if the Trump White House worked with him on this secret memo that is so important that is, launch this, release the memo thing. And Nunes said, no, I didn't work on it. When he asked him, did your staff work on it with the White House? He was like, oh, I'm not going to answer that. I see. So in other words, your staff did work with the White House, so this memo is even more useless. So it's basically written by the Trump White House and is seen as some sort of gotcha of the FBI. Preposterous.
I've got one more breaking thing today, another preposterous gotcha of the FBI. So I can never pronounce this guy's name. Peter Strzok? Is this Strzok? Just for fun. So Peter Strzok, he's one of the two, as Trump has called them in tweets, the lovers in the FBI who were tweeting treasonous information about Donald Trump. They were the two who revealed that there is an FBI secret society that I found out on InfoWars today is planning to nuke Washington, D.C., which is an especially clever plan since that's where the deep state is. But they're nuking their own city. Anyway, so for a while now, after it was revealed, I believe several months ago, that 6 months prior, they had been sending some tweets that could be interpreted as derogatory about Donald Trump. Now, Mueller immediately removed them months before anybody even knew about this, but that was still being used. The presence of those tweets was being used to discredit the entire investigation, even though Peter Strzok was also texting derogatory information about Hillary Clinton and Bernie Sanders. We now find out today that same Peter Strzok took part in writing a letter encouraging James Comey to reopen the email investigation into Hillary Clinton in fall of 2016. So this secret society is a complex place. I don't necessarily understand their plans, but this guy who wanted to do nothing but take down Donald Trump apparently was also doing whatever he could to take down Hillary Clinton.
Or maybe he works at the FBI.
Well, that's what I'm saying. Like the idea that they can take this one tweet and then imply that he's part of some sort of coup against Donald Trump is ridiculous. Just like James Comey, he was involved in investigations that target both sides.
So his lover, Lisa Page, where does the word secret society, that phrase, come from? She had written in a text, kidding, like, why are you guys having a meeting without me? This wasn't in my calendar. Is this part of a secret society? And after all this nonsense secret society talk, even Ron Johnson, the senator from Wisconsin who started it, had to go and say, yeah, perhaps that was made in jest. Yep, sorry about that. Anyway, so now Strzok, now we know based on this latest news that he was counseled to reopen the investigation on Hillary Clinton. Since he did that, a lot of Democrats, I don't know that I agree with them, although it did have a huge swing in the election, think that was the reason Hillary Clinton lost, because Comey, shortly before the election, reopened the investigation, did this dramatic thing of like, oh my God, we've got a laptop and we got to reopen the investigation on Hillary Clinton. By the time they had concluded that the damage was done. I think that was one of many, many factors that led to Hillary Clinton losing. I think a lot of Democrats think that was the factor. So if Strzok had a plan to undermine one candidate, well, he did it, and it was against Hillary Clinton, and it worked. So now the damning text from Strzok about Trump is that Strzok thinks Trump's an idiot, which at least 60% of the country agrees with. Like even a lot of the Republicans who voted for him, like, I mean, he is an idiot. So like the big conspiracy is Strzok agrees with the overwhelming majority of the country. But if there's one candidate he actually did something to, it was Hillary Clinton. No, look, and again, this is so frustrating because the right wing throws out so many stupid, insane conspiracy theories. And then we wind up having giant conversations about them, and then cable news takes over. It gets started with sometimes literally from InfoWars with their insane things about they said the secret society was going to drop a 2,000-pound bomb on the White House. Now they're talking about nuking DC, and it starts from the insane and works its way outside the asylum. And Matt Gaetz was on InfoWars the other day. He's a Republican congressman. He's on with an alt-right troll and invited an alt-right troll who is like more
Holocaust
insane
denier.
than even Alex Jones, a Holocaust denier, an insane person to the State of the Union. So there's a congressman, then it jumps to a senator, and then it goes to Fox News, and then it goes to CNN, and then it goes to MSNBC, and then the whole country is talking about insanity. There is no goddamn secret society, and Strzok and Page didn't like Trump, but they hated Bernie Sanders.
Yeah.
And they didn't much like Hillary Clinton, and apparently they totally screwed Hillary Clinton over.
Yeah. Turns out they liked Lincoln Chafee, though.
But that plot to get him to be president didn't work out that well.
No, not so much. He was close. He was close. Yeah. Hashtag feel the chafe. Anyway, so we should probably take our first break, though. When we come back, we want to dive into infrastructure and infrastructure reform. It was a big topic in the State of the Union last night. What are they actually planning? Leaked details make it pretty clear and not that surprising.
Hey Dave, as you can probably see, Skype froze. Frozen crash.
You know, I'm watching that documentary on the Vietnam War, and there was a TV journalist in the middle of some tiny little village in Vietnam doing live TV as the soldiers were burning the Vietnamese huts, and it didn't crash. And that was
That's a good point.
1965, and he was in Vietnam.
All right, back on the Young Turks, Cenk and John with you. Proud Lumberjack writes in using hashtag TYT Live on Twitter. Now Cenk knows how Ben Carson feels, who has yet to spend one waking moment in his life to this point. Referring to my 10.5 hours of sleep.
He's amazing.
Ben Carson, little known fact, once got 10.5 months of sleep. Okay.
He woke up after the winter just feeling great.
Yeah.
He's a bear.
And learned how to become a doctor in his sleep when an angel came to him. Super last thing says, we all know he's just going to, referring to Trey Gowdy, we all know that he's just going to pursue a pop artist career. The hair was the first indicator. Bitchy Gay Guy says, we need a new TYT Live Kickstarter to get Cenk some paid sick days. Come on. And Graham Ambrose writes in, rats leaving a sinking ship, Trey Gowdy, Jason Chaffetz, Rodney Frillinghausen, etc.
Yeah.
Especially Gowdy and Chaffetz, because they were the ones charged with investigating Trump.
Exactly.
All right, what's next, John?
Okay, let's talk infrastructure. Trump made a big deal about infrastructure in last night's State of the Union address, but we have details that have been leaked about one specific plan that he has that was not mentioned in last night's address, although he did sort of lay the groundwork for it if you look closely enough, and you're gonna see that in this clip.
It is also time to rebuild our crumbling infrastructure. We built the Empire State Building in just 1 year. Isn't it a disgrace that it can now take 10 years just to get a minor permit approved for the building of a simple road? Any bill must also streamline the permitting and approval process, getting it down to no more than 2 years and perhaps even 1.
So there, he seems to be implying that we could have all these great buildings and bridges and roads. It's just that all this red tape is stopping us. We just want you to have access to more stuff. But it turns out that that might not actually be the case. According to a leaked draft of the infrastructure plan obtained by the Washington Post, which is fake news, the administration is considering proposing changes to the approval process for natural gas pipelines that cross National Park Service-owned land. Because it's weird though, he was talking about red tape, but he didn't mention natural gas in that section. So the way it's worked since the 1920s is that companies seeking to build pipelines through national parks have had to obtain approval from Congress. And with good reason, they constantly leak and have environmental disasters and cause tons of problems. So we need to very carefully look at what the expected effect of these pipelines is. And that has been very clear over the past few years with Keystone XL and DAPL and all of that. But we know what Trump thinks about those pipelines, and he thinks pipe away. So the proposed change would only require approval from the Secretary of the Interior. And if you've been watching this show, you know that Zinke is gonna approve of those pipelines. So why go through the House? Why go through the legislature, especially what if they lose control and suddenly you have some people who aren't quite as enthusiastic about natural gas? Well, that's a downer. Just let the Secretary of the Interior do it. You could do it way faster and approve tons of projects that wouldn't otherwise get built.
Well, there's another aspect of this too, because if it's going to go through some national parks in particular states, the senators in those states might get a lot of heat from their constituents and not want to do that. In fact, when they originally had a plan to destroy some of the national parks that were in Utah, Jason Chaffetz, back when he was in the House earlier in this term, said, oh yeah, that's wonderful, let's just sell them all off. And then conservationists that are conservatives, hunters, etc., came out and said, no, we go fishing, we go hunting in those lands, we love those lands, no, don't sell those things off. Then Chaffetz had to put out an apology, and in doing so, he did one of the most hilarious things, totally underrated, nobody else talks about it. In his apology, he put himself in a picture of a hunting outfit, right, in camouflage, and he's like, oh yeah, I hunt too, I love national parks, just kidding. I gotta get out of here.
Yeah.
And then he retired and became a Fox News host or commentator. So that's why it might be really unpopular, even with conservatives. So if you have to get congressional approval, it might be really hard to do because it involves voters, etc.
Yeah.
Now you put it in the hands of the Secretary of the Interior, Ryan Zinke, he'll approve anything.
Yeah.
So it's like, yeah, done, and that streamlines it. The House wanted to do this even when Obama was in charge. When the Republicans were ruling the House, thinking it's much easier, and by the way, come on guys, I mean, Democrats haven't done things for their donors. Like if you're trying to look out for the fossil fuel industry or donors in general, you want the executive branch in charge so that they could just
make it happen.
Make it happen with as little scrutiny as possible.
Yeah.
And especially if you get a Republican president, those are all going to get approved.
Yeah.
So that's what's happened now.
And that's why, I mean, this is an area with infrastructure where he's been talking about this $1 trillion, $1.5 trillion plan for literally years now. And some people think, well, maybe this is an area where Trump isn't going to totally screw us. But it looks like, as with many of his other plans, this is primarily not going to build roads for you. It's going to shovel tons of money into the pockets of the wealthy and corporations, real estate companies, natural gas companies, and things like that. And this is part of a pattern with Donald Trump. Back in April, leaked documents from the Bureau of Land Management revealed that the Trump administration wanted to, quote, streamline the extraction process for fossil fuels on federal lands, representing a shift in priorities for an agency that, under the Obama administration, prioritized conservation over extraction. But that should not be a surprise because the running theme since the initial confirmation hearings the Trump administration started were you take an organization and you put someone in charge who's going to do the exact opposite of what its purpose is, what its mission statement is. So if this is intended to conserve federal lands, no. It's now designed to destroy and totally extract all the resources from those federal lands.
So what happened to draining the swamp?
They're going to extract the swamp.
In this case, they're literally building a pipeline through the swamp and other national parks for the benefit of the other swamp, which is the donors.
Yeah.
Man, you got to give Trump credit for being an old school politician when he ran in 2016. And we didn't talk about it enough on the show. I was just thinking about that earlier today. Like that whole drain the swamp thing. And you know why? Because it didn't get much press coverage because the press hates talking about that because a lot of the money, as I've told you over and over, billions of dollars goes into television. So that part of the Trump speeches, they almost, they didn't spend a lot of time talking about. But that was a brilliant political strategy because there is tremendous corruption in Washington. And Washington doesn't like to talk about it. TV doesn't like to talk about it.
Yeah.
Now, Trump's idea of talking about corruption, then winning the election, and then doubling down on corruption is the oldest political trick in the book.
Yeah. And
now it's being executed right there in front of us.
Exactly. And in the second hour, we're going to have a case of an individual act of corruption. Anna's going to be breaking that down. But actually, let's transition right now to a very related topic. As we have so many times before on this show over the course of this past year and even before, we're going to be breaking down a case of extremely blatant corruption inside of the White House, staying on the theme of infrastructure. And so here we have a story involving floods and an organization called the LaFrac organization, which I hadn't been familiar with, but it's apparently one of the largest privately held real estate firms in the United States. And they're active in politics. Between 2013 and 2016, the LaFrac organization spent over $300,000 lobbying Congress on what are called flood map issues and other issues, the report states. This is information that had been released. In 2015, for example, the company criticized new federal flood regulations enacted by President Barack Obama in the wake of Hurricane Sandy that required the company to raise the height of a Jersey City site by about 3 feet before construction because this would increase development costs. Well, yes, any sort of protection, like in the case of floods, is going to cost a little bit more money, but there's a reason for it. Floods have been wreaking havoc across the country for a long time, and it seems to be getting worse as climate change continues. But for the LaFrac organization, having to do these Obama-era regulations would be a little bit more expensive, and so they don't want that. Well, then suddenly we don't have Barack Obama anymore, we have Donald Trump. And the company's chief executive, Richard LaFrac, was appointed by Trump last year to be the co-chair of his infrastructure council, which quickly fell apart. And LaFrac was one of the few remaining members of it. And so he had perhaps some outsized influence over Donald Trump and his agenda. So let's see what he pushed for. Well, last August, Trump signed an executive order rescinding the Obama-era flood rules that had set stricter building standards aimed at reducing flood-related damages and requiring that federally funded infrastructure built along the coastline take into account future projections for sea level rise. And right there, you basically have a 2-for-1. You have the real estate companies not wanting to have to pay more money to make sure that their buildings don't immediately get knocked over the next time there's a flood. And you have an attempt to stick a finger in the eye of environmentalists and regular Americans who are concerned about climate change. So they got those 2 for 1. However, as I said, floods continue. And so in the wake of Hurricane Harvey, the Trump administration seemed to have a change of heart and said it would consider reinstating the flood rules that it had just rescinded. Because immediately after they rescinded it, there was evidence of how terrible that idea was. When all along the coast and in Texas, we had so much flood-related damage. So we had some hope. Perhaps LaFrac was not going to get his way and we would get those regulations again. But unfortunately, it doesn't look like that's going to happen. A leaked version of the latest draft of the White House's infrastructure plan was published by the Washington Post. Any mention of reinstating a version of the flood protection standards is, quote, utterly lacking from the draft, according to people who have read it.
Okay, so first let's note the amusing irony of his infrastructure council crumbling. Apparently not very well built.
Yeah, from the very beginning it was LaFracked.
Secondly, look at how brazen Trump is. He's like, okay, I'm gonna take the guy who stands to gain the most amount of money from infrastructure projects and put him as the head of the infrastructure council. I'm not gonna pretend to have neutrality. I'm not gonna pretend not to be corrupt. I'm just gonna take the guy who's gonna make the most money from it and put him in charge. And he did similar things with Carl Icahn, and then that blew up, and then Icahn had to step aside. He's done it in almost every department. The corruption, it's almost like he is trying to publicize it. He just doesn't care because he thinks it doesn't matter. I could shoot a guy on 5th Avenue and my supporters will still support me. It doesn't matter what I do. It only matters what I say. And so he says that he's draining the swamp, but in reality, his infrastructure council was building the swamp, the infrastructure of the swamp. So, and yesterday on the program, Anna and I covered a story that was an epiphany for me as to why a lot of his supporters don't ever back away from him, because they were told by evangelical leaders that God has chosen him. And obviously God can't be wrong, so God can't change his mind, so you can't change your mind. So he thinks, I'll just rub your face in it. I'll take this guy who's gonna make a lot of money from this and put him in charge of the decisions. Who cares? So now, look, that again fell apart, but the essence of the policy didn't change at all. So why do we need regulations that do cost more money? Like, for example, in California, the housing has to be built to different specs, and it involves a lot of regulation to make sure that the buildings don't fall down during earthquakes. Why? Because we have earthquakes. And the buildings used to fall down and people would die. Thousands of people would die from the earthquakes. Now we have more regulations and almost nobody dies in those earthquakes. Why? Because the buildings don't fall down. That is why you need regulations. If you live in an area prone to flooding, like Jersey City, where he was building properties, LaFrac was, and didn't want to pay the extra money for the flooding. Well, it floods there. It floods in Houston. And while you were paying attention for a second during the flooding in Houston, they're like, okay, wait, we'll pause. We'll pause. Nobody looking. All right, take away the regulations. Let LaFrac and his buddies do whatever they want. That's the essence of Trump.
And briefly, if I could try to appeal to those evangelicals on this specific issue, I will grant you that God chose Trump, but God has done other stuff in the past. I mean, back in the day, he gave incredibly detailed impending flood-related regulations to Noah, and that worked out for him. Everyone else was boned.
But it cost a lot of money to build that ark, but there was good reasons to spend that money. So because, as you know, flooding happens from time to time, and so better to be prepared, and nothing is more biblical than that.
Why don't we take our last break of the first hour? When we come back, we have some information coming out of an ongoing police-related scandal in Baltimore of some of the things they were doing, the corruption, even on our show, and we cover it more than perhaps anyone else. This is some mind-boggling stuff going on in Baltimore, so you're not gonna miss it.
They'd rather lose to Republicans than have a progressive win with them. That's how dumb the corporate Democrats are.
It's the Democrats who lull you to sleep, and at the end of the day, they're the ones who push the right-wing agenda.
This is why you lost to Trump, you fucking moron. What the fuck is wrong with you? Whoever wrote that, I'm sure they were typing with one hand and going like this with you. The Democrats are dead. The way you feel right now, that's how a chump feels. Do not freak out.
All right, well, the Young Turks special election day coverage dropping.
An amazing power panel.
Look at this panel. You want to talk about power?
Like a smart Destiny's Child.
We're all too strong.
We spun a revolution. Yes, another one. Aren't you excited? Wow.
Some of the best writers in the country are right here on this panel, with the obvious exception of John Iadarola.
Let's not so quickly discount Harry Potter fan fiction.
We have elected the top Twitter troll in the country.
What ran me away from Christianity was judgment and condemnation.
Assaulting peaceful protesters in North Dakota, crazier than bombing Yemen, crazier than bombing Syria so much they ran out of bombs.
Reductive interpretation of what their motives are, what Putin's are, by these amateur experts is just beyond.
We don't kill our journalists, and they do.
All right, back on the Young Turks. Cenk Uygur, John Iadarola with you. By the way, John and I will be at the Young Turks party. That's on February 15th here in LA. The VIP tickets are almost sold out. They might even get sold out by the end of the show. It is, in fact, time to panic. TYTnetwork.com/party. The VIP is for meet and greet and take pictures with us, etc. And general admission, there's tickets available. So go to TYTnetwork.com/party and we hope to have as many of you guys watch that as we can, and we're gonna do some special fun things there at that party/rally. Yeah. Let me read some tweets for you. Jess Yep, it's me, writes in, I wonder where Republicans plan to live after they decimate Earth. Perhaps Elysium.
Heaven.
Jason Bournemouth writes in, we should start citing the English language among Trump's sexual assault victims. Took me a while to understand that, but I understand that assaulting the English language.
Okay,
yes. And then Bob says,
grabbing it by the pronoun.
Oh,
okay. Something. I don't know. That's. I'll think of something better. Don't worry. Come back to me.
No, that was pretty good. Grabbing it by the gerund.
I think grabbing it by the prefix, I think, is better.
Okay.
That'll be the shirt.
Okay. Bob says Trump didn't win in 2016. The voters told the Democratic Party to shove Hillary Clinton up their ass. Run her again, lose again. Get a fucking clue. Hashtag Bernie 2020. Now look,
or both happened.
Yeah. Bob's a little harsh there, obviously, but. You know, I just randomly shared on Twitter the coverage we did last night of Bernie Sanders' speech, which, by the way, if you're a member, that'll be up for you. You can get all of our State of the Union coverage, including Bernie's speech, tytnetwork.com/join to become a member. And I posted that, or just our analysis of it, and I don't know how many of these are real and how many are bots, but. Bunch of reactions to it, like, oh, there he goes again, splitting the ticket. Like, what does that mean?
What ticket?
And they haven't had a primary yet. And why is it assumed that who's the front runner? Like, why is it assumed that he's splitting it?
Because there are some people who literally still think that the primary is going on. Look, and that's the only lens they can see politics through. There's no ticket. There's no election going on right now.
By the way, both sides, the always Hillary side and the never Hillary side. The never Hillary side thinks the primary never ended all the way through the general election, right? When in fact it did end and we had a general election. And the always Hillary side is like, no, we're still running. I don't know, maybe they think she is gonna run again.
He's spent the last year trying to inspire people to run and keeping the most important issues out there front and center wherever possible. He's not splitting the ticket. He's elevating the important topics we need to be talking about.
All right, member shout outs are Ian Anderson and Heather Polinsky. Thank you for making the show possible. tytnetwork.com/join. Oh, you knew that. Okay, go ahead, John.
Okay. Baltimore is currently in the middle of one of the largest police scandals of recent memory, certainly of my memory. And as this case continues, some of the information coming out about what these cops were getting up to is pretty shocking. So there's this particular squad that had been like accosting drug dealers and stealing money, and then it goes even past that. It gets into extreme police brutality territory. So we want to give you those details. Prosecutors say that the squad, which was tasked with getting illegal guns off the streets, abused its power by robbing suspects and innocent people, raiding homes without warrants, and selling confiscated drugs, among other crimes. So conceivably, one part of the squad, I guess, could then bust the other part of the squad if they wanted to. Detective Maurice Ward, who's already pleaded guilty to corruption charges, testified that he and his partners were also told to carry gun replicas and BB guns, quote, in case we accidentally hit somebody or got into a shootout so we could plant them. The directive allegedly came from the team's sergeant, Wayne Jenkins, according to the Washington Post. And so we don't know for sure yet if anyone actually used that advice, although there is evidence that they did. Detective Marcus Taylor, another cop currently swept up in the scandal, was carrying a fake gun almost identical to his service weapon when he was arrested last year, according to The Sun. And so this sort of advice not only stops you from actually understanding why a shooting happened or why somebody was killed by the cops, but might make it more likely to happen in the future.
So this partly explains all the toy guns you always hear about when people are shot. Like, oh, sorry. Oh, somebody was shot, and but you can understand it was an innocent misunderstanding because he was holding a toy gun. I'm like, there's that many toy guns in the world? And so some of them, I'm sure, were real toy guns, and some of them apparently were not. And this is too common.
Yeah, or were toy guns, but they weren't actually that person's toy guns, and it's sort of a get out of justice free card for the cops in that case. But then if we could just go back to the busting the drug dealers for a second, the sums of money that are involved are pretty big. So at one point, this squad stopped a drug dealer during a traffic stop, took $6,500 from him, apparently found out where his home was, went there, busted in without a warrant, and took $100,000 out of a safe, which was just then theirs, I guess. I mean, he's a criminal, so who is he going to turn to? But that's not what the cops are supposed to be doing there. And apparently what they would do in some cases was they would stop a drug dealer and then ask them for insider information, saying things like, if you had a squad, where would you go to break in to try to get money or drugs or something like that? So they were sort of flipping the drug dealers, not to score arrests, but to score drugs and cash for their own gain.
So I want to talk about one other thing that is particularly terrible about this story. One of the reasons that they kept toy guns around was to plant it on kids they would shoot.
Yeah.
So they knew that they would sometimes get into what they called shootouts or just flat out shooting. One of the things that they would do, for example, to give you a sense of it, is they drive really fast into a crowd of people or kids that were standing around and stop suddenly, and then whoever ran, they would chase. Now, do they know who was in the crowd? No. Do they have any information on them? No. They did it just to harass these people, etc. And then, as you've seen in some cases, people would get shot, and then and sometimes from the back. And so after they shoot them, if they're kids, what makes sense? Oh, they had a toy gun. So it is as bad as it gets. Now, look, 6 out of the 8 have already pled guilty. So this is not conjecture. This is absolute reality. One of the terrible stories coming out of it is one of the cops was set to testify against the other cops. The night before the testimony, he wound up getting shot by his own gun. What a coincidence. And so they haven't solved that one yet. My guess is it is related to the cops he was going to testify against.
I've read up on it, and there's a story as to what supposedly happened, but nobody sees that and doesn't think that's incredibly suspicious. Look, this is Baltimore. Baltimore's been in the news for a long time because of their cops. This is just more information. It's the same city that had the rough rides and all that. We've been talking about this for literally years. The hope is that with this information coming out, assuming that some evidence is able to come forward without the person preventing it being killed suspiciously right beforehand, that there will actually be some sort of reckoning for this police department. That you can clear out what looks like not just a few bad apples, but entire squads and management that seem to think that they're supposed to operate as some sort of mafia or something like that. And that would at least be some sort of silver lining on all these tragedies that we're now finding out about.
But no, I'm told all cops are perfectly innocent, and how dare we question them? Okay, just a few bad apples. All right, one last story.
Okay, we'll do this one fast. This is good news. Need a little bit of good news after that. Okay. Although Republicans in the House and in the Senate have done whatever they can to kill net neutrality, many states are now stepping forward to reassert these protections for internet content and access to the internet. And this week, thankfully, we're in California, we get to talk about California. So the California Senate passed a net neutrality bill of its own. Now, it's not law yet, but it's an important step. The bill would prohibit home and mobile internet providers from blocking lawful content, applications, services, or non-harmful devices, which is of course important. Throttling would also be outlawed, along with paid prioritization or providing preferential treatment of some internet traffic to any internet customer. The bill prohibits ISPs from interfering with a customer's ability to select blah, 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 a lot of stuff that you want to do on the internet. But these are the sort of the most important core parts of net neutrality, is that particular types of content and applications and things like that aren't being blocked, and they're not manipulating the speed or relative access you have to information based on whether they've been paid by these companies or not, or whether the companies have some sort of bias against the particular sort of information. And that is very important. But on top of that, ISPs would be forbidden from using deceptive or misleading marketing practices that misrepresent the treatment of internet traffic or content to its customers. Because this is, of course, an issue that has from the very beginning been cloaked in a lot of misinformation. It is perhaps the only reason that you don't have near universal support for net neutrality. You do have majority support, but some people have been convinced that net neutrality is actually a bad thing. This would help to fight against that. So the bill passed 21-12. With all 12 of the yeses being Democrats. It would have been great to get some Republicans on there, but unfortunately not. I would look into who their donors are personally. It will now move to the state assembly where the Democrats have a majority. So it looks likely at this point that it will succeed, although don't take your eye off the prize, continue to check into it. And what's great is that it's not just California. The FCC is already being sued by 21 states and the District of Columbia. And the governors of Montana and New York have signed executive orders to enforce net neutrality. Several other states other than California are considering net neutrality legislation as well. So this is a little bit of nationwide good news on an incredibly important issue.
So this is how states like California, which are progressive, can make a big difference. When we have different emission standards, well, if you'd like to sell cars in California, well, you got to follow those emission standards. California by itself, I believe, would be the 7th largest economy in the world if it was a nation. So that forces Toyota and Ford and GM and Honda to follow California's emission standards.
Yeah.
And now if you want to be an internet service provider, well, now this is going to be incredibly relevant to how you conduct your business, unless you'd like to lose all business in California, which is a really bad idea.
Yeah.
So Montana and New York have done a great job of passing laws on this, and so you can tell it's not a conservative or liberal issue in that sense. Because the good folks in Montana are not known for being overly liberal, but everybody wants access, free access, not meaning free as in you don't have to pay money for it. Of course, we all pay money for our internet service providers, but free as in freedom on the internet and not biased towards some websites, not biased towards against some customers. And so both conservatives and liberals want to protect that. In this case, great job from the Senate side of California in doing that. There's some progressives that have been pushing in that direction, and leadership there heard that, and that's why it's always important to put pressure on, not just in primaries, but throughout the year on all these legislators to push in the right direction. And just because you've got bad guys in charge at the federal level doesn't mean that you give up or you let it fizzle out. No, you always fight, and you never know what kind of a difference you can make.
Yeah, and pressure is going to be incredibly important even after this passes in California and hopefully similar bills in other states, because there is a little bit of bad news, unfortunately. The FCC's repeal of its own net neutrality rules included a provision to preempt state and municipal governments from enforcing similar rules at the local level. So what we have brewing here is across the country an impending conflict over these issues. Will the states be allowed to establish their own versions of net neutrality? Or will the FCC be able to assert dominance over the entire country? I don't know if this ends up going to an appeals court, perhaps all the way to the Supreme Court, but that fight is coming, and you can help influence its eventual outcome by putting pressure on people in California and across the country now.
And I was led to believe that conservatives care deeply about states' rights.
Yeah.
Now, all of a sudden, not as much. By the way, let's just review for the record why they cared about states' rights. Back when states wanted to discriminate against African Americans, the Republicans were all about states' rights. Now that states want to legalize marijuana and make sure that the internet is free from interference and is the same internet we've always had and protect net neutrality, all of a sudden, did we say states' rights? We're just kidding. We don't actually have any political philosophy or principles. All we care about is the money, Lebowski.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, we are out of time here in the first hour. When we come back, we've got someone deported from the country that is an absolute outrage that we'll tell you about. Ken Bone, you remember him with the red sweater?
I remember the sweater and the mustache.
Yeah, you know, we had good intel that he was a Republican, but apparently he's a little upset at Donald Trump. He didn't want to reveal his politics, but it turns out he works in coal, and I didn't know that.
I knew he worked in the energy sector. I didn't know about the coal.
Yeah, and he thinks that perhaps Donald Trump is not being forthright about the coal industry.
Can you believe it?
Is what I have to say about that. Okay, we'll be right back and tell you all about it.
Oh, did you guys help us win a Shorty Award last year?
Did you?
In the category of Audience Honor for Best Overall YouTube Presence?
Best overall YouTube presence.
We want to win it again this year.
That's right.
We want to win, and we can't do it without your help.
We need you.
We need you.
All right, so here's how we're gonna do it, guys. Look, we wanna win for best overall YouTube presence for the Young Turks, but we also wanna win best in overall Facebook presence and best web series for The Breakdown, which is great. But let me tell you about YouTube presence. Go to tytnetwork.com/YouTube presence, which is very logical. Click on the vote in best overall YouTube presence, also very logical. You can log in using your Facebook or Twitter accounts to create a Shorty account to submit your vote. You share your vote on social media, ba-bang, that counts as an extra vote. You're voting like crazy now. Now, do this for The Breakdown and web series and in a Facebook presence as well. And you're seeing the links to vote on your screen. And don't worry, we'll have them in the description box below. So easy peasy, you just go right there, just click, boom, you're there. And get a load of this. You can vote once per day all the way to February 22nd.
Every day, every day.
Go nuts, have fun. You know, we always tell you to get out and vote. This gives you an opportunity to do it over and over again. Sorry, you know, by the end, we might just get tired of winning.
No, and this is great practice for the midterm elections. You know, get that voting muscle in order.
That's right, here we go, ready?
Yeah.
Practice.
back on the Young Turks. Cenk Uygur, Anna Kasparian with you guys. Is that new?
It's new, yes.
All right, fun for everybody. So we've got a couple of tweets on the Baltimore cop story that we did, and then we briefly mentioned Bernie, and of course that lit everything up. So first on the cops, Zappa fan says, more corrupt cops. Who would have thought that? Every single person without blinders on. But as you know, of course, there are a lot of folks with blinders on. And D. Moore says about their strategy of driving fast and then suddenly stopping and having people disperse and chasing the people who ran. He says there's no nice way to put it. That's human hunting by any other name. It's what you do when you're duck hunting. Shoot a round into the ground, kill the ducks that fly away.
Whoa.
It's really sad, but unfortunately that is an apt analogy for what they did in Baltimore. And then of course they had the toy guns to plant on the kids, which is just heartbreaking. Okay. Angel's Advocate, now moving on to Bernie versus Hillary, says Bernie isn't splitting the ticket. He's the only one people are buying tickets to because most people don't want to go to the Dems' shitty party. I think that is generally true, as we explained in our live State of the Union coverage yesterday. And by the way, of course, that's up for the members, tytnetwork.com/join. And look, part of the reason for this birthday party that we're doing is that I want to do rallies more often. And I want to work up to Bernie, right? Mm-hmm. And I want to get people to start joining us and talking about progressive ideas. Mm-hmm. That's part of the reason why I want Allison Hartson to come to this one, and then for trusted progressives to come to more and more. So if you want to be there on February 15th, that's tytnetwork.com/party. In this case, literally. Michael Napin writes, the hashtag Never Hillary people didn't think the primary wasn't over. They didn't want another corporate establishment candidate. Michael, I hear you, brother, and neither did we. That's why we fought tooth and nail against Hillary Clinton in the primary and for Bernie Sanders, to the point where I did something where the rest of the media told me I should never do. I went and introduced Bernie Sanders in his California stops. But the other person who agreed with me that the primary was over was Bernie Sanders, and said that that Hillary Clinton, like I said, would be a better choice than Donald Trump. And even if you thought Jill Stein would have been a better choice than either one of those folks, did you really think she was going to win? Look, I don't want to reopen the debate. All I'm telling you is my position was identical to Bernie Sanders' position. All right, anyway, one last one here. Dave's Gone Mad writes in, aren't you guys even a little bit worried that lifelong Democrats over the age of 40 will stay home rather than vote for someone that refused to join the party? The fact that Sanders wants to be the head of a party he refuses to join is insulting to lifelong Dems. Some people might see it that way, but I am perplexed by that. Maybe because I was never on any team, right?
Yeah. I didn't realize how much party politics sways people, right? Because I remember when I was going to school for political science, American politics was my favorite topic that we would discuss. There was international relations, comparative politics, whatever. But American politics was fascinating, especially when we looked at voting habits. And the argument was by some political scholars that people who vote along party lines are the low information voters, right? They're the ones who don't have the time. And by the way, it doesn't mean that they're dumb or anything. It just means that people are busy. People don't do what we do every day, okay? They have families to take care of, jobs to deal with. So it's a very limited resource to sit there and research every topic. So those who vote along party lines, low information voters there. But no, I think that it's now completely shifted toward people who they have this tribal mentality and they don't want to vote for, even if they agree with every policy position a politician has, if that individual does not identify as a part of their team, they will vote against them or not show up to the polls to vote for them. It's the weirdest thing. Please just focus on the policies. I don't care about whether they're a Democrat or a Republican, independent, doesn't matter. What do they want to do for the country? That's what should concern every single voter, not which team they're on.
Yeah, I just literally don't understand that way of thinking.
It's just devastating.
So, name a corporate Democrat. Joe Lieberman was a lifelong Democrat, right? Until he lost the Democratic primary, then immediately he became an independent. Isn't that funny how that works? But was a lifelong Democrat, and he was a terrible Democrat. He voted against progressive priorities. See, to me, putting the Democratic loyalty to a party over the actual policy positions, it's so weird to me, because isn't this about policy? Isn't this about real change in people's lives? And I guess some people think, no, it's about my team winning, and I don't give a shit what the team stands for. And that's just, I don't get it. I don't get it. So no, I don't care at all what Bernie calls himself. I care about his policy positions. Okay, let's do the rest of the news.
Immigration officials continue to deport individuals who have been in the country for decades and have not committed a crime. The recent case that has made national headlines involves a Palestinian man who has actually been in the United States for nearly 40 years. And he was not only someone who was here for a long period of time, he was also a small business owner who had employed several people in the state of Ohio. And he also had a wife and daughters who were US citizens or are US citizens. But it didn't matter. The ICE officials who made the decision to deport him even went so far as to ignoring an order from the Judiciary Committee in Congress that urged them to allow him to stay so they can actually investigate the situation. So now let me give you the details. His name is Omer Othman Adi. And again, he has been here for nearly 40 years, 39 to be specific. Immigration and Customs Enforcement had kept him in detention for 2 weeks, ignoring a House Judiciary Committee request that the Department of Homeland Security review his case, which would have allowed him to temporarily remain in the US. So he would have temporarily remained in the US for about 6 months while his case gets investigated. And the reason why his case needed to be investigated was because there was an accusation that his previous marriage was a fraud, just so he can get a green card. Now, his ex-wife came out and said, no, I was coerced into my initial statement, but our marriage was not a fraud, and he was in a relationship with me, and he's never committed any crimes. This needs to be investigated. He should stay here in the United States. But it doesn't matter. ICE officials decided to deport him anyway. Now, according to Representative Tim Ryan, who has been on the warpath in regard to this particular case, he said that Amer was a pillar of the community and brought commerce to a downtown that craved investment. He hired members of our community, he paid taxes, he did everything right. There are violent criminals walking the streets, yet our government wasted our precious resources incarcerating him. So I'll give you more details, but Cenk, I want you to jump in.
Yeah, first of all, great statement by Congressman Tim Ryan. Appreciate his hard work on this issue, and I think a lot of people in Ohio do. So secondarily, the manner in which ICE enforced this is also deeply troubling. So he was going to check in with ICE, and now this is a story we've heard so many times over and over again. He's doing his regular check-ins, and he thinks everything is fine. And then all of a sudden, they spring this on him, and they say, okay, now we're gonna kick you out of the country, so make plans to leave, okay? So he's like, wow, that's terrible, but he's a law-abiding citizen. ICE has told him this. He makes plans to leave.
He and his wife, his current wife, they sold their home. They sold their home and bought tickets to fly to Jordan, which is where he was born. And then ICE got back to him and said, oh, no, wait a minute, no, actually, you're gonna be fine, this might be investigated, you don't have to leave. He goes in for a second check-in with ICE officials, and then they detain him.
Yeah, the first one that was problematic, there was many, but the one that we were telling you about, they strap an ankle bracelet on him, say we're gonna kick you out of the country. Then they bring him back in at a later time and go, no, just kidding, we're not gonna do that, everything's gonna be fine. Next time he comes in, they arrest him and they put him in jail for 2 weeks. But look, he was already following your orders. That was already appeared to be the worst case scenario, but leave it to the Trump administration, take a worst case scenario and make it even worse by needlessly keeping him in jail, and detention for several weeks before then moving him to Chicago and then getting him on a flight to Amman, Jordan, and with barely an ability to say goodbye to his family here in America. Is this who we are? Unfortunately, with Trump in charge, yes. Uprooting families, destroying businesses, all in the name of politics and demagoguery. That's what he's turned America into.
This is insane, and it's our taxpayer money going toward deporting people like Amer. Okay, this notion that they're only going after these dangerous criminals, and as Trump put it during his State of the Union, these MS-13 gang members. Yeah, everyone wants the MS-13 gang members gone. Everyone wants real criminals out of the country. There's no question about that. Everyone's in agreement. But there's no reason why a man who's been in the country for 40 years, is a job creator, hasn't done anything wrong. There's no reason why we should be deporting him, spending our resources and our time to tear his family apart and destroy his business.
His wife's an American citizen. All 4 of his daughters are American citizens. I mean, this is preposterous, and it's not about the criminals. And one last thing, we talked last night in our live coverage of the State of the Union about the projection that Republicans do, and they do it on almost every issue. But think about it in the context of this issue. So Trump says, oh, the people coming in here are undocumented, without papers, and a lot of them are criminals and rapists. Now, who does that describe best? Now, it's very uncomfortable, and a lot of people in this country don't like to talk about it. But the original settlers here, they were undocumented immigrants. They didn't come with any papers. They didn't present any papers to Native Americans. And what did they do? A lot of them were criminals. And when you read the history of Christopher Columbus, they were rapists. So they came in and raped and pillaged this land and
spread diseases.
Right.
Yeah.
And now they turn around and project that on to people coming into this country to work for the lowest wages we have, to provide for their families, the most powerless people that we have. So it's not just that it's not true of these immigrants, it's that it was true of the people that they formed their identity around and now projected onto those immigrants. So that's the reality of today, and yet we lose another valuable member of the community today when Trump was pretending to care about just criminals. No. His programs have always been about uprooting people who don't look like him.
Yeah. Well, there's been a lot of turnover in the federal government, so let's discuss that. Even more turnover than you know about. The director of the Centers for Disease Control, Brenda Fitzgerald, has decided to resign from her post following an investigation that determined that she had purchased stock in the tobacco industry immediately following her new position with the CDC. Drums. So let me give you the details. Fitzgerald bought tens of thousands of dollars in new stock holdings in at least a dozen companies, including Japan Tobacco, one of the largest tobacco companies in the world. In fact, that company produces 4 different brands of tobacco products here in the United States. Now, the day after the purchase, she toured the CDC's tobacco laboratory, which researches how the chemicals in tobacco harm human health. And she was quoted as saying that too many Americans are harmed by cigarette smoking, which is the nation's leading preventable cause of death and disease. And she also vowed to continue to use proven strategies to help smokers quit and to prevent children from using any tobacco products. So obviously there was a clear conflict of interest here. You can't be the director of the CDC and then immediately buy stock in tobacco products, especially when that is the exact type of product that you want to help Americans stop using. So.
Yeah, so leading cause of death in the country, but also the leading cause of my profits. Now, what she did was an obvious conflict of interest, clearly unacceptable. Her stepping down makes sense. We could leave the story there. But, and I'm gonna preface this by saying this is some degree of speculation by me, but why would you go into the CDC and then buy stocks of tobacco companies right after? Because it's not like she had the stocks from long ago. And she forgot that they were in her portfolio or anything like that. She bought them afterwards. You might do that if you know that you're actually not going to do much to fight tobacco smoking.
Duh, yes,
Right.
yes. That is why it's a huge conflict of interest. Also, look, we're dealing with a huge opioid crisis, which is, partly to blame or mostly to blame on pharmaceutical companies and lax regulations. Well, keep in mind that she also invested in pharmaceutical companies including Merck and Bayer. So Merck and Bayer, as far as I know, don't produce the opioids in question, but it doesn't matter. There's still pharmaceutical companies that, in my opinion, need to be regulated to prevent the abuse of certain drugs or the overprescription of certain drugs. To know that she purchased that stock after getting this position at the CDC should concern everyone, because it means she's not gonna aggressively go after them. That's gonna hurt their profits, which in turn is gonna hurt her profits.
Yeah, and the more she goes after them, the more money she might lose. I mean, you think that's not gonna affect her? It's as if we had a division of the government that was to prevent gun use. Well, theoretically, I guess you could say the ATF, right? And the guy leading the ATF goes, "Oh, great! I bought a lot of stock in gun companies."
I mean, I actually don't think it's that far-fetched that that's already happened or is happening.
Right. So, and what does Trump do? He puts in charge of departments the people intended to destroy those departments. Scott Pruitt at the EPA tried to destroy the EPA when he was outside of it. Rick Perry at Department of Energy, and the list goes on and on. So is it that surprising that somebody you put in charge of the CDC was quietly betting against the CDC to make profits for herself at the expense of the rest of us?
Oh, the best part is that she was placed in that position by Tom Price, who had to resign from his position in the federal government because of his overuse of private jets, using taxpayer money. And by the way, Tom Price famously would go on cable news and talk about how Democrats are wasting money on these flights. And then he proceeded to use these private jets and make US taxpayers pay for it.
What do we tell you all the time? Republican 101 is projection. Tom Price knows that he's ripping off taxpayers by using private jets. So he goes on cable news and says, "Can you believe how the Democrats are ripping us off by using private jets?" So, but my favorite part of the story is when I thought I was making a trenchant observation and Anna went, "Duh."
Sorry. I like how you're like, this is speculation, might be controversial. No, it's clear as day. I think it's fair to speculate on that.
Yes.
Okay, all right, we gotta take a break. Let's do that, and when we come back, Stormy talks to Jimmy Kimmel. Drama ensues. I'll tell you what that drama is. You don't wanna miss it. And then Ken Bone, if you can remember from 2016, he was at one of the debates between Trump and Clinton. He called Trump out last night during the State of the Union. I'll give you the details to that and more.
The Stormy is coming.
Yes.
All right, back on the Young Turks. Lots of tweets here. Kayleen Babcock says Trump and his ilk aren't interested in justice; they're interested in punishment. That to them is what they call rule of law. Not if it's the right kind of punishment, just punishment, especially against people that they're opposed to. Smegman says, funny, if this guy was a violent criminal, he'd probably be less likely to get deported because ICE likes the easy ones. That's true. They'd have to track them down, do their job, etc. They're like, why don't we just round up the guys who are good guys who voluntarily report into us? That's why we're seeing so many of those stories. It's gross. Just Another Name says, so when are they going to change the name from ICE to SS? AJ Beamish says, I'm 47, a lifelong Democrat, and if the DNC runs another establishment candidate, I'm staying home. I'd prefer Bernie. If not, and whomever they run wants my vote, they better stand up on the policies progressives want and need. Great, appreciate that, AJ. And then Lolly Lollipops says, Cenk, vote for Hillary over Jill because Jill can't win. 30 seconds later, don't vote along party lines at all, only focus on their policy. Not even a full minute needed to go full 180. So I know that there are some of you that are in that camp. I just need you to be, or at least understand my point, because apparently you didn't get it. So if you find that insulting, that's okay, because you didn't get it. So in a primary, I care about your policy positions, and in a general election, I care about your policy positions, okay? Now, hold on. Bernie Sanders' policy positions are a million times better than Hillary Clinton's policy positions. And by the way, he was more likely to win the general election. I was 100% right about both of those things, okay? So now we didn't win that primary. In a general election, Jill Stein had a 0% chance of winning. And and then by the way, Omi writes, Cenk still doesn't fucking get why people would vote for Jill Stein. It's not because she would win, it's about giving a third party a chance to rise to challenge our duopoly. Omi, I get that, and a lot of people here voted for Jill Stein, okay? And we discussed that at length. If you go back and watch my video saying why to vote for Hillary Clinton instead of Jill Stein, or instead of anyone else, in the general election, Bernie was no longer in the race. I said, hey, things that were purple states or ones that you thought are blue states might not be blue states, like Pennsylvania. And it turns out, oh yeah, no big deal. Let's vote for someone who has no chance of winning in Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin. Oh shit, it turns out that you were wrong. And Donald Trump did have a chance of winning. Hillary Clinton had a chance of losing. And then now Donald Trump has won. Now, the real choices were between Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump. Who had the better policy positions? Hillary Clinton was 1,000 times worse than Bernie Sanders and 1,000 times better than Donald Trump. If you still can't see that, then we're never ever going to agree.
Right.
You think that Donald Trump, who's uprooting these people, destroying their lives, doing demagoguery against dreamers, etc., is the same as Hillary Clinton? Look, that doesn't mean Hillary Clinton is good. That doesn't mean I'm in favor of corporate Democrats. That's why I fought them tooth and nail. But if you can't understand that Hillary Clinton is not the same as Donald Trump, then you're wrong, okay? And when I warned you that Hillary Clinton might lose those states that you thought were unlosable, I was, as it turned out, 100% right. Exactly right about what happened in the election. If you don't like that, that's a sad day for you, but those are facts.
So, look, I think that there is a clear disconnect between those who, for some reason, refuse to accept the reality of the situation we're in right now, and what's happening to the countless, Americans whose lives are being destroyed at this very moment because of the person that was elected as president. Okay, so look, there is some portion of the audience that doesn't want us to talk about Russia, doesn't want us to ever, justify our decision for voting for Hillary over Trump in the general election. Obviously, the way that we voted in the primaries. There's a portion of the audience that gets upset that we talk about Trump on the show, that we cover stories about the president of the United States instead of constantly shitting on Democrats, okay? For that portion of the audience, I'm not sorry, okay? The show is what it is. We do the show, or the stories that we feel passionately about, that we care about. I am not gonna spend an hour every day, an hour to 2 hours every day talking about corporatist Democrats. Are we gonna talk about them when it makes sense, when they do something that we disagree with and we want to draw light to it? Absolutely. But to say, don't ever talk about Russia, there's no evidence when there is evidence, and don't ever talk about, Trump, we're tired of hearing about Trump this, Trump that. That's the president of the United States. You don't want to hear those stories, then go ahead and watch whatever program you feel comfortable watching. I am not gonna change the content that I feel is important to cover on this show because there's a tiny portion of the audience that likes to throw feces when we talk about stories that matter. If you don't like it, then fuck off.
Okay, look, okay.
I'm done with it because it's so incredibly unreasonable.
Guys, we're not covering Trump because of shiggles, because we're amused by it. He's not a reality show star anymore. We're covering Trump because he's the one that sets policy. He sets policy. He's the president. So what are we supposed to do? Like, oh no, let's live in an alternate reality where Trump isn't the president and doesn't set policy. And by the way, I destroy the corporate Democrats, and they hate me for it. They hate me almost as much as they hate anyone in America. So we're in no man's land. And so what I'm asking the audience is, for the ones who understand and appreciate this, there's almost no organized force on our side. The corporate Democrats hate us. I guess whatever, the never Hillarys, I don't know, whatever. We're not good enough, right? The Trump people and the alt-right despise us. So we're trying to do the right thing here. You agree, great. You don't agree, I get it. But I mean,
we're not. Look, here's the thing: we're not here for anyone to like us. We're here to do the stories that we think are important to cover. If you disagree with our topic selection, you disagree with our commentary, that's on you. But I'm tired of constantly being torn apart by people who have watched the show for years and know who we are and know that we care about these issues, know that we're not corporatists, know that we're not part of some establishment. Everyone despises us. That's fine. You don't have to like us. You don't have to respect us. But understand that every story that I do on this show is a story that I care about, a story that I want to share with the audience, and a story that I think is important. Same with Cenk. This is not a popularity contest. People have hated me ever since the first day that I've done this show. But the constant pressure to not cover things that are incredibly important is, at this point, overwhelming and incredibly frustrating. So with that said, can we please move on?
Yeah, all right, just one super last thing. If anyone tells you that we're a Hillary supporter without giving context that we fought against her tooth and nail in the primary, is trying to lie to you. And that's it. You know that. So don't pretend as if like, oh yeah, while the Hillary people despised us to our core, and while they cost us untold money and untold damage, and while we got crap from the mainstream media for having Jill Stein on right before the elections, they're like, oh, you lost all credibility by having Jill Stein on because we did a town hall for her. We gave her a platform anyway. Why? Because we believed that you needed to have all the choices. Then to turn around and say that we're Hillary supporters is bullshit. And you know it's bullshit. Anyone spreading that is, oh yeah, no, it's great that Trump is fucking president. Enjoy. Okay, anyway, let's go on.
All right. Back in 2016, during the debates between Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton, a man stood up and asked a question. His name was Ken Bone, and he was curious about what their policies were in regard to the coal industry. Now, he at the time was a coal power plant operator, so his job was on the line. He was very much concerned about this issue, and he became a meme instantly because of the fact that he looked the way he does. Okay, wearing the red sweater, the mustache, the glasses. And he was undecided in regard to who he would vote for at the time. Well, he is back in the news today because of a very simple tweet that he put out during the State of the Union. It was during Trump's statements about the coal industry. If you don't remember what he had said, take a look.
We have ended the war on American energy, and we have ended the war on beautiful, clean coal.
So what does Ken Bone think? As someone who was employed by the coal industry, have things changed? Have we ended this war on beautiful, clean coal? Well, Bone says, I work in the coal industry, very little has changed.
So here's more background on Bone. So it was a fun little thing, and it became a mystery as to who he was gonna vote for. And he would religiously not say, right? And he didn't say during the election, he didn't say after the election. But then people dug into his background. Look, he's a private citizen. If, as we've discovered, if you dig into anyone's background, dig far enough, deep enough for public figures, you'll find something damaging about them, right? You could do it to literally almost anyone, right? So, but Bone didn't ask to be a public figure, and they dug in and they found damaging stuff. Apparently some stuff about erotic photos, I don't remember what that was. I don't want to remember what it was, okay? Then they found that he had said that Trayvon Martin's killing was justified. So now I hate that position. It just it makes my hair stand on edge, etc. But I don't want to hate Ken Bone, and I'm sick of the divisiveness. And I know, look, you could say I'm a hypocrite for that, and I hear you, brother, because I see those Republicans gleefully standing up for beautiful, clean coal as if they did a goddamn thing over it. And so I call them out all the time, etc. But those are politicians, and I don't want the country, private citizens, ripping each other apart. And Anna and I have talked a lot about this. You sit next to a conservative anywhere, and you talk, and I know it's cliched, but you're going to agree on most stuff. And it's the politicians that do the propaganda and that split us. Like, for example, my favorite issue, the one that's the most important, money in politics. Both Republican voters and Democratic voters hate the corruption, right? So, but Ken Bone to me, and so I say that as context for I'm not a Ken Bone fan if those are his opinions, right? But he is, in a sense, the average American, and that's why he resonated at the time that he did. The average American who doesn't know that much about politics and goes, Hillary Clinton, Donald Trump, I can't tell, right? When in reality, there's a giant difference between them, and they're both in their own way loathsome, but one is clearly more loathsome than the other, but he couldn't tell, he didn't have enough information to be able to tell. And obviously has some conservative leanings based on the Trayvon Martin, but he's a person, and I'm sure he has 1,000 other opinions, and some might fall on the left and some might fall on the right, and you can't just caricature people based on one thing they've said, even as deeply troubling as that comment about Trayvon Martin is. So now, as that prototypical average American, he's looking at what Trump has done and going, wait a minute, that's not at all what you promised or what you're saying today. Now he's in that industry, so he can see it with his own eyes. So I think therein lies the story of Donald Trump's political career. That for however long he stays in office, more people every single day realize this is not what he promised us.
Right.
This guy is not what he claimed to be.
So during the State of the Union, there was a pretty lengthy portion where Trump applauded himself for passing these tax cuts for the wealthy. And I thought that it was a poor political strategy, not that he ever really thinks about strategy, but I thought it was a poor political strategy to emphasize that so much because it was such a deeply unpopular bill. And also, Americans are gonna notice that their wages are stagnant. They're gonna notice that their tax cuts will expire while the tax cuts for corporations and the top 1% will be permanent, right? They're gonna notice those things. And so you're right, the longer he's in office, the more his policies really set in and give Americans an opportunity to realize how destructive and damaging they are. There's gonna be some portion of his voters that will flip, right? That won't support him anymore. But then there's that core base, especially the religious voters that we talked about in previous shows that genuinely think that Trump was put in office by God himself. those people will never flip. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if their wages are stagnant. It doesn't matter if they're still having a tough time putting food on the table for their kids. It doesn't matter if they're gonna lose their health care. It doesn't matter if they're gonna lose the government aid that they get because they don't make enough money working a full-time job at a company like Walmart. Doesn't matter, they will continue supporting him, and that's the most devastating part about all of it.
Well, final thing here. Guys, the most important percentage of Americans, unfortunately, are the ones between the 40% that Donald Trump peaks at. Although in the latest poll he's at 42, right? And on election day there was a poll that had him at 37. So let's say roughly 40%. That's his maximum, and 25%, which is his minimum. That 25% think God put him into office and God's never wrong, right? So the difference with that, Ken Bone is in that middle area between 25 and 40%. And that's the difference between Trump staying in office and not staying in office, whether it's through impeachment or the 25th Amendment or the next election. And so losing the Ken Bones of the world does make a difference. It makes a giant difference. And the difference between 40 and 25 is 40 is barely hanging in there, barely hanging in there. 25 is devastating. So the closer it gets to 25, the closer it gets to leaving office. That's why stories like this are important.
Let's take one more break. When we come back, a fun story for you guys, and we'll wrap up the show.
Do we have a break?
I need to take a break.
Oh, okay, we'll be right back. All right, back on the Young Turks. All right, let's keep going.
All right. Stormy Daniels, who is the adult porn actress and filmmaker who is alleged to have had a sexual affair with Donald Trump, and then it was alleged that she was paid $130,000 in hush money back in 2016, appeared on Jimmy Kimmel's show last night. Now, the appearance coincided with the State of the Union address, and a lot of people were wondering whether or not she was going to speak up about all of these reports regarding her relationship with Donald Trump back in the early 2000s. And there was an interesting exchange. Now, before the State of the Union, there was a statement released and allegedly signed by Stormy Daniels indicating that, she completely denied any type of relationship with him and denied that there was ever any hush money involved. Let me read that statement to you right now, graphic 50. The fact of the matter is that each party to this alleged affair denied its existence in 2006, 2011, 2016, 2017, and now again in 2018. I am not denying the affair because I was paid hush money, as has been reported in overseas-owned tabloids. I am denying this affair because it never happened. And then she allegedly signed that statement. Well, Kimmel noticed something about that signature, and I wish I could show you the original video, but because of copyright issues, we are not able to. So we recreated the exchange between Kimmel and Stormy Daniels. Take a look.
What fascinates me, the signature on the original statement does not seem to match the signature here, and I have gone back through my library of photographs of you to compare headshots that you have signed, and they don't seem to match anything except for the original statement. So I guess my question is, did you sign the statement that was released today?
I don't know, did I?
Wait a minute.
But it doesn't look like my signature, does it?
So wait, you're saying that perhaps this letter was written and released without your approval? All right, so do you know where it came from? Do you have any idea?
I don't know where it came from. It came from the internet. I also work for the FBI and I'm a man, according to the internet today.
Well, we'll have to do a full examination.
So
I love your recreations. I think we should just do the whole show on that.
So she doesn't deny that she didn't write that statement, and she doesn't really even deny that she had that affair with him. Like, she can't say much because apparently she signed something that's preventing her from really speaking out. But In Touch had interviewed her back in 2011, and she gave pretty graphic details about her sexual affair with Donald Trump.
Yeah, so that was before she had gotten $130,000, allegedly.
Yeah.
And before she had signed a statement saying that she can't talk about it, allegedly. So if you guys remember when that original statement from Stormy Daniels came out, I read some of the lines and said, this isn't Stormy Daniels. This sounds exactly like the Trump team, because it had a bunch of Trumpisms in there. I forget exactly what they were, but it was like, I tremendously deny this accusation bigly. I'm like, she didn't write that, okay? And she didn't come out with a statement.
Right.
Trump's lawyer came out with a statement saying, believe me, this is what she wrote. And I was like, no, I don't believe you, you're Trump's lawyer, and that sounds like Trump.
Yeah.
And so now with her obvious non-denial there, like, golly gee, yeah, I guess that, is that my signature?
Yeah.
No, it's not.
So
she never wrote it.
So again, for me, him having an affair, I don't care. Like, if it's a consensual situation, I don't care, it's not a big deal. For me, what was interesting was the hush money, and also how he's a target-rich environment. What don't we know about? Like, there are things out there that we don't even know about yet. Like, what else has he paid for in hush money? I don't know, and I feel like when I say he's a target-rich environment, I'm worried about bribes, I'm worried about extortion, I'm worried about who has what kind of dirt on the president of the United States and how it could compromise the way that he behaves and the policies that he pushes for. It's just,
and what he's willing to do or trade to make sure that those stories don't get out. So that's a relevant issue. And look, and Ben is right when he says on the show that hypocrisy is a little overrated. Everybody talks about hypocrisy, but in this case, when the evangelical leaders came out and said, that's all right, we're giving Trump a mulligan on this one. And I'm gonna get to the most relevant part here, but think about all the different parts. If Obama had slept with a porn star, cheated on his wife, do you think he gets a mulligan? If there were
no chance.
Very legitimate stories saying that he paid her hush money so that the American people didn't find out right before the election, you think the evangelical leaders and Trump voters would have given Obama a mulligan, right? And then finally, the important part, using what now the allegations are that he used campaign money to pay her. That's illegal. And oh my God, they would have shredded Obama. It would have been the biggest scandal of his presidency by an order of magnitude, 100 times bigger than whatever nonsense scandals they invented about Obama. And now it's barely a story for Trump. So she never wrote that letter. God bless Kimmel for proving that without a shadow of a doubt, right? And she gave the 2011 interview. You could see it. You can see exactly what her and Trump actually did. All right, we gotta go, guys. Rebel Headquarters is next. Bye-bye. right, welcome to Rebel Headquarters. We just did the Young Turks, and I'm going to read you one tweet from as a reaction to the show that we just had, and I'm sure there are others, and I'll check my account because I want to see all the ones good, bad, the ugly, etc. Right, and I want to get feedback from you guys. But Dave Furr also tweeted in and said the fact that you guys can have an instant conversation with your audience is why independent media is awesome. So Dave, I appreciate you writing that in, and I hope that people take that as the earnest conversation that it is, as frustrated as all sides get on those issues. All right, let's go forward. So joining us today is a candidate unlike any that we have ever had before. It's partly based on the position that she is running on. A lot of times we talk about national races, but this is a very local race, and we wanted to make sure that you guys heard from all the different levels. That's part of the point of this show, and to hear from progressives at those levels. So joining us right now is Rachel Ann Vander Werf. Rachel Ann, did I say that roughly right?
Yeah, it's Rachel Ann Vander Werf.
Okay, I think I got it. All right, you're running for Sacramento's trustee on the American River Flood Control District.
Yes, the longest name.
Yeah, that's a long name. What in the world is that?
So I'm running to pretty much manage our levees here in Sacramento. And if you know anything about Sacramento, it's pretty much a giant floodplain. And so our job is to run the money that protects those levees, manages them, and handles them during flood issues.
And so you seem to be uniquely qualified for this because you're an environmental scientist. And is there any other environmental scientist on that board? Is it a board?
Yeah, it's an elected board of the district. And okay. No, there aren't. And I am an environmental scientist who works in drinking water, and then I also have my master's in water resource management.
Well, that seems like that's exactly what you studied for.
It is, actually. I specifically studied flood control on the American River. It's something I've been really passionate about because I grew up here in the Sacramento Valley and know how important flood control is because it affects our lives almost every couple of years anytime we have major rains.
I might not have ever talked to a candidate more uniquely qualified for a position than you are for this position. So congratulations on that. So is this a hotly contested race? And I say that with some degree of ignorance because the further you get away from national elections, I'm keeping it real here, the less I know. And I guess that's normal. I mean, what would I know about flooding in Sacramento? But are there a lot of other people in this race?
Yeah, so the board is made up of 5 people, and 3 of them are up for re-election this year. 2 of them are previously elected, and then 1 of them was recently appointed. So I am running against 3 incumbents pretty much.
Okay, so are you the only non-incumbent in the race?
Yes, as of right now. Obviously this election is in November, so other people could decide to jump in, but it's not very common.
I got you. So, and you said you're running against the 3 incumbents. Does that mean the top 3 vote getters go in?
Yes, so it'd be me and 2 of the other people.
I got you. So you just have to unseat 1 of them?
Yes, just 1.
Okay, fascinating. I learn something new every day. That's why I love this show. Okay, so I mean, part of obviously what led you to run is because you studied that exact issue. But why decide to get involved at that level rather than keeping it to science or whatever other path you were on?
So this is just a volunteer board. It's not going to be my day job. I still get to continue to be a scientist every day, which is one of the reasons I'm interested. I also had a lot of community members who both I've talked to or before I decided to run, like, were pushing me, like, Ray, this board is up for election. It's something you already know about. I actually knew about the board before I was asked to run because I looked at it while I was doing some graduate school studies. So just being asked and kind of looking into it and realizing they didn't have any other scientists on the board kind of pushed me to step up. And Also, I'm running against 3 older gentlemen, and that kind of also made me, like, I go to the board meetings and there's one woman there. It's definitely not as representative as it could be.
Yeah, and sure, that's an important topic. And the other thing that needs to be represented on the board is scientists who have studied flooding.
Very true.
Right. Rachel Ann, I have in my notes that you're a Wolfpack volunteer. Is that right?
Yeah, actually, I volunteered both for the national team, helping schedule trainings, as well as I was one of the state organizers here.
That's awesome. That's awesome. And what made you get into that?
As someone who's actually worked for a legislator, money in politics, I see it as an issue. I see it every day. And as an environmentalist, I know I'm not going to change any environmental laws if people are getting big money from oil and plastic companies. So that was why I got involved. I think that's the best solution.
What legislator did you work for?
So I worked for a Republican from my district, Assemblyman Dan Logue in California. I was their water expert. I helped pretty much just read water code and helped try to clean that up.
So I don't know if you want to talk about this, allowed to talk about this, but that makes me intensely curious. So when you talk to Republicans about water, is that also partisan? They go like, oh no, your water science, that's a Chinese hoax. Or are they like, oh, okay, I get it. Water is water and science is science, and okay, then I'll listen to what you're saying.
At least for me, most of the time when I talk, this is a nonpartisan race as well. I talk to people about it and there's no arguments. Like flood control is flood control and water issues. As long as you're not talking about who has the rights to it, is a water issue. Like we all want clean water. We all understand what that is. And it doesn't matter what spectrum you're in. Everyone wants that.
Yeah. Although we recently covered on the show, a liberal actually it was in this case, claiming that water is not just H2O. As a scientist, I'd like to run that one by you. Is water just H2O?
At least every time I've ever done any kind of chemical analysis of water, the purest form of water is just H2O, but technically they're correct. Water does have other molecules in it, if you want to be really technical.
Oh, okay. All right, you see that? We learn something every day here. All right, so I also wanted to note a couple other things that you've got here. You said that we need smaller districts. Now that's not necessarily related to obviously the flooding issues that you care about, but why do you think that is, and why is that a priority for you?
Actually, I disagree. It does have a lot to do with the flooding districts within that area, because this district I'm running for, it's 150,000 voters. And that's a huge area for a really tiny district where most of the time people don't have the opportunity to even know they live in it. And I think if we had a representative district, so like if someone only represented 30,000 voters for that seat instead of at large, we'd be able to get a lot more involvement in the community and be able to tell people and get a lot more, this is a very progressive thing. So I'm all boots on the ground mostly. I don't have any staff, everyone's volunteers. And I think I could talk to 30,000 people. I think I could do that. I would make it my goal to do that. But sadly right now, that's how many people I have to talk to for this big district. And that's not even getting to talk to all of my district. That's just some of them.
That's a great point, and I know through my experience at Wolfpack, there are some states that have smaller districts and some states that have much larger districts. And the ones with smaller districts have representatives that are far more representative of their constituents because they see them and interact with them a lot more, and it makes a giant difference in terms of our democracy. So that's a great point. One last thing, you said we got to work to reduce pesticide usage. So talk to me about that in regards to what this issue is.
So they've already reduced it a little bit, but in the past, this board and other boards like it have used lots of pesticides. And in California, specifically Sacramento, 80% of our water comes from surface water for drinking. And pesticides is not good for anyone, and none of us want that in our drinking water. And I want to make sure that we don't revert back to using more of that, and we continued on this path to use less and less of it for protecting the levees. They do use it like for rodicides and things to make sure that there aren't rats and moles digging through the levees, but there are other ways that we can continue to work on management that's better for both us and the environment.
Well, so I want to give you your links now, Rachel, because I want, that's what we normally do, but I want the audience to also understand that in some ways, this is the race they can have the most impact on. Because it's such a small race that any donations or volunteers could easily put Rachel Ann over the top. So the links will be in the description box on YouTube and in the comment section on Facebook. But if you agree with Rachel Ann and think she should be she should be one of Sacramento's trustees on the American River Flood Control District, well, you can make a huge impact in that race. So Rachel Ann, thank you for joining us on Rebel Headquarters.
Thank you so much for having me on. It was really an honor to be on here.
Thank you, and I actually learned a lot, so I appreciate that as well. All right, when we come back, we've back to national. We've got a race in Arkansas. Can a progressive win Little Rock? We'll talk about that. right, guys, we had trouble connecting, and that's why we took a little while to come back with Paul Spencer, and we couldn't get the Skype to work. So we will have him on a different show. But I want to tell you about him and then address some of the things that we discussed in the Young Turks for a couple minutes, and then we'll go to the post game. So Paul Spencer is running in Arkansas 2nd District, which includes Little Rock. That is a Republican +7 district, but in an election like this, it is very possible that he could win. I want to give you his links right here, just in case. Please look at him up, paulspencer2018.com, and that's the donation and the volunteer links right there. But like I said, we'll try to get him back on the show as soon as we sort out those technical issues. Now, I'm going to give you a light tweet before I tell you something important. So Philip V writes in, Cenk is the worst in reading Dutch newspapers, Dutch names, Dutch cities. He should hire me just to say anything Dutch or French or German. I've never agreed more with a tweet that starts with Cenk Uygur is the worst. That is true, my friend, and I'm sure that I am miserable at it. Trying my best here. Okay, that is in reference to a story I did yesterday on the show. Some of you on Twitter have, some of you who are watching who are either viewers, members, or both, obviously, so have said that, hey, why don't you guys on the network talk to one another, because there's some issues that you really don't agree with on. Ask and ye shall receive. Actually, we were planning to do this for a while, and now it looks like it's coming together. I believe it's going to be Monday after the show, but I will let you know tomorrow. We're going to have Kyle Kalinske on the show, not on the show, but on TYT interviews after the show, because you know on the show we don't do interviews. So, and Kyle has a different opinion than I do on Russia, so we're going to hash it out. It's not going to be a debate, it's going to be a discussion. I have tremendous respect for Kyle. He's the host of Secular Talk, you should definitely check out. I think he's a very rational guy, and I think we have some reasonable disagreements, and we're gonna let you guys hear about it. And we're gonna let you hear both sides, and we're gonna try to talk it through and see what we agree on and what we disagree on. So that should be Monday after Rebel headquarters in the post game, probably around 9 o'clock Eastern, but I'll give you the exact date and time probably tomorrow. So we were already on it, and we're gonna try to do that. Look, there's a lot of stuff you guys don't know behind the scenes for understandable reasons, but we've got a lot of hosts in the broader network who don't agree with each other. And it's an impossible task trying to keep everybody on the same team. And what I'm trying to do is make sure that people who don't agree with me also get a voice. It's super easy to say, okay, everyone who doesn't agree with me is out, okay? That's the easy path. I don't want to do that. I want to make sure you hear all sides. And then I get all the time, this person said that, you should get rid of him. This person said this person said that, this person said this. I'm trying very, very hard not to give in to what a lot of progressives do, which is circular firing squads. So, best of my abilities, we're gonna try to keep everybody on the same team and moving the ball forward, even if we disagree on some issues and vehemently disagree on others. Wish me luck. All right, guys, we're gonna take a break here for the members. We'll come back with the post game, tytnetwork.com/join. And if you remember, post game and then old school tonight as well. I think JR is gonna be on. It's always great to have him on the show. So we'll be right back.